So America really needs no introduction, but I'm going to tell you a few things that I learned about her in my research. She was born here, but her parents were born in Honduras. As a Latina, she represents the largest, youngest, and fastest growing group in this country. She experienced 9/11 as a teenager, and it inspired her to attend college on a scholarship to study international relations at the same college I went to. We just learned in the back. She's consistently chosen acting roles that portray reality, not the Hollywood version of reality that we often see. She was the first Latina to win an Emmy for lead actress in a comedy. She is a founding member of Time's Up. And she has a new book out, it literally came out yesterday, called America Like Me. So based on all of those things, I'm pretty sure you represent the America that I would like to live in. When's your run for president happening?
That was not in the questions they sent me. I have no plans to run for president.
Yeah.
I have no plans to run for president.
Okay, fine. We're trying to break news here. This is live journalism. So I want you to tell us a bit about your book. It's about growing up between cultures. And there are a lot of people that we have heard of, and some we may have not, who also discuss that sort of living between two worlds.
Yeah. So the book is called American Like Me. And shortly after the 2016 election, my wonderful book agent, David Kuhn, who's in the room, called me and said, we need stories about the immigrant experience in the culture. Now's the time to do it. I think you need to edit and curate voices of the immigrant experience. And I thought to myself, that's actually not my place, because I'm not an immigrant. I'm an American. I am 100% born and raised in America, and I feel American down to every bone in my body. And but what I am interested in is the experience of being an American, being 100% an American, and being something else at the same time, being inextricably linked to my family's culture and history, and that no man's land that I grew up in, where I was both of those things, and yet I wasn't either of those things, because I was taught very early on that although I felt 100% American, there were people who did not see me as their kind of American. And while I felt linked to my family's culture, I also was not accepted 100% as a Latina, because I was too Americanized. And so this was an experience that I grew up with and felt completely isolated in, completely confused about, and felt like I didn't belong anywhere. So, when I started realizing that I wasn't alone in this experience, and that truly, it's probably the majority of people's stories sitting in this room, that experience had never been represented in our culture. And so that became the part of the American experience and narrative that I got excited to tell. And I was shocked that a book like that didn't already exist. You know, the fact that it's 2018 and no one thought to write that book. And so it meant it was more than just about me telling my story, because the point was truly that we're a community, and we are a huge group of Americans who have this experience. And so it was important to me to tell the story alongside so many other Americans from all different backgrounds, from all whose families come from all kinds of countries. And so there's incredible contributors like Lin-Manuel Miranda and Issa Rae and Kumail Nanjiani and Joaquin Castro and Michelle Kwan, and incredible contributors who all have beautiful stories to tell, and who all have contributed greatly to our culture. And the whole point of the book for me is for it to get into the hands of a young person, and show them that there's no limit to what's possible for them, and that regardless of what's happening in our culture right now, the stories that are being told about us, we still have the power to tell our own stories and to protect what we know to be true.
I want to talk a little bit about your journey to where you are today. And you have a story about the first audition that you ever went on that I think speaks to a lot of this. Could you tell us that story?
Yeah, I was 16 when I got my first audition, and I thought that, like, if I got an audition, like, that was it, I had arrived, and I would have a job and a career and Oscars and in no time. So I had my audition for, like, a late night, cable infomercial about bail bonds. And this was going to be my entry into Hollywood. And I arrived, and I did the script. I said whatever the words were, something like, "Daddy, I can't wait for you to come home," or something like that. And the woman stopped me and she said, "Okay, honey, could you do that again? Could you just sound more Latina this time?" And I was like, do you want me to do this in Spanish? Or she's like, no, just sound more Latina. And I thought, and I said, I am Latina, so isn't this what a Latina sounds like? And she goes, "Okay, honey, thank you, bye." And I got up and I left, and it took me forever to figure it out. And I got home and I thought, oh my God, she wanted me to speak in an accent. She wanted me to speak English poorly. And that was, my first dipping my toe into the world of Hollywood and auditioning. And, it's so interesting because as a child, I just believed what I had been taught. I had been taught that this was the land of the free, and that there was nothing standing in my way. And I believed it to my core, and it is in some way what allowed me to keep going past my own friends, my own family, saying, "What's your backup plan? Like, people like you don't really have a place in Hollywood." And all I would think is, like, what is wrong with you people? This is America. Like, don't you know that all I have to do is work hard and want it and I'll get it? And I just believed it to my bones. And I know now that I was met with huge fortune, and I was in the right place at the right time to get the opportunities I did and to have the career I have. But it was a dream that I believed in wholeheartedly, and it was incredibly heartbreaking to have my eyes open to what the industry very quickly let me know about who I was and who I was to them, and where I belonged and where I didn't belong.
You are an actor, but you're also a producer and a director. Mm-hmm. Is that part of the reason why you went into producing and directing?
Absolutely, 100%. I think, first of all, I have been acting since I was 17 professionally, so I've had a 17-year-long career. And I would constantly see male actors come onto the set to shadow and direct, and, men who had been on TV shows far less long than I had, or had far less experience than me. And I would just get so angry and think, like, of course he thinks he should be a director, I've been doing this for 17 years and I've made over 100 hours of television, and then I thought, oh, why am I mad at him? Like, I'm mad at myself. Like, why haven't I stepped into what I know that I'm fully capable of doing? And I was terrified to move into I was terrified to ask to direct an episode of the show that I was starring on and producing. But really what helped me get through that fear was looking around and seeing other women who had taken that leap and really asking myself, you know, we go around and we say we need more women stepping up into positions of power. We need more directors. We need, you know, women who are going to have the courage to fight the good fight and get in there. And yet, here I am with all this access, and I can't. If I can't get past the internal struggle of, can I do this? Do I deserve this? Am I good enough? What if I'm a failure? How could I possibly expect that young women who have far less access into this unwelcoming environment are going to take that leap? And so in a big way, it was that reckoning with myself of walking the talk and taking that leap. And so that has been a huge part of what's compelled me to direct and to produce content that represents women very intentionally and very unapologetically in the ways that I want to see women represented.
Yeah, how do you decide what to invest in or what you want to portray?
I want to invest in women and people of color. And so, so I start there, and I look for talent, and it's not hard to find the talent. The talent is there. It's nurturing that talent, ushering that talent, getting that talent over and past the barriers that often keep them from gaining the opportunities that they need to make it in this industry. And so with the access that I have and the experience I have, that's what I'm investing my time in assisting that talent to have a fair shot.
I feel like we hear so often about Hollywood and also business, we need more diversity, we need more diversity. And so there's a lot of lip service put to it. But we don't always see that trickle down into real action. It seems that you are taking real action as somebody who has the privilege to do so. But what advice or orders, maybe, do you give to others about what they should be doing? Like, truly, like quotas, inclusion riders, like all of these things that we hear about, are those the steps that Hollywood should take?
Well, here's the thing about Hollywood is, like, I don't know who people are talking about when they say Hollywood. Like, people don't get in a room. It's not like, okay, Hollywood, get in the room. Like, are we still being sexist? Yes? Okay, everyone go back to their business. Like, we don't have those conversations as an industry. You know, I feel like I felt very compelled after the Oscars So White campaign, and when the conversation was really reaching sort of a fever pitch, I felt really compelled to ask myself, like, I just don't want to be having the same conversation for the rest of my career and the rest of my life. Like, when is it going to change? When is it really going to change? And so I had to really ask myself, like, well, what works? What's worked for me? From the day I was 17 years old and stepped onto my first set, or rather went to my first audition, I have been having to advocate for myself, for my dignity, for the characters that I play, to also maintain respect and dignity. And so I have some experience in what works. And after asking myself this, I find, you know, I feel like most people are not bad people. But I think most people don't ever ask themselves, am I a part of the problem? And Hollywood is made up of a bunch of individuals who uphold Hollywood by playing by the rules every minute of every day. And I think the only way that we change it is if individuals take a look in the mirror and say, how was I a part of the problem today? How was I, an individual, a part of the problem? Or how can I be a part of the solution? And, you know, I've spent a lot of time of my career teaching mostly white men about my experience. And I haven't gotten very far when I'm shaming them. And this isn't to put judgment on that. I'm angry. Like, make no mistake, I'm angry. But when I've when I have brought my anger into a room, it very rarely works in my favor. So what do I know as a woman of color who's had to advocate for myself for my entire career, my entire life, that I don't have a choice, I have to be a teacher. And that's the way it's been for me. And I've had to assume the best, assume that someone can hear me, assume that they want to tell the best story that they can tell, that they want to look good, and if I can help them look good, they might listen. And that's not sexy. It might make some of your skins crawl, because the idea that, you know, that we would have to play to somebody's ego or stroke them so that we can get what we want or need sounds not appetizing. I understand that, but ultimately, when it comes down to it, what's going to allow me to win more dignity for this character, and therefore dignity for the millions of people who see themselves in this character in this moment? And so all of this to say, I think that we're thinking about this problem as like, when is Hollywood gonna change? And you can't solve that. It's like, I can wake up every day and talk to the people whose ears I have and try to convince them and inspire them to be a part of the solution. And it works. It doesn't always work, and it doesn't always feel like a victory. Sometimes the victories are really smart, like, please, can I not wear that sombrero, you know? But it's the daily grind of saying, I'm gonna keep showing up and advocating for my own dignity in this space, because until I can receive dignity in this space, God knows no other woman who looks like me is going to.
Is that exhausting? I mean, like, we talk about emotional labor now, that's sort of the buzzword, and it's like women having to teach, women of color in particular having to teach. Do you ever feel tired?
I feel tired all the time, yeah.
Also, you have a new baby.
Is it exhausting? Sure, you can look at it that way, and there are times where I really need to step back, and I really need to take a nap, and I really need to put in a away message and go do things like gestate my child and bring him into the world. And breaks are good. Like, everybody should take breaks. Everybody should have a nap. Like, I'm for naps. But you know, I don't know how useful that is to the conversation. Like, we are living in a moment in history where we don't have a choice. It's so much is at stake, and I think for me, I never was given a choice. I was 9 years old the first time my skin and my body became political. You know, I became aware that I was a political being. You know, Prop 187 was on the ballot in California, and children like me who were 9 years old, their parents had to pull them aside and say, your teachers might come ask you questions that you don't understand. You know, and I thought they were asking all the kids those questions. So I'd go to my friends who were white and I'd say, people might ask you questions that you don't understand. And they'd look at me blankly. And I'd realize I didn't choose to be political. I didn't choose to make my skin color or, you know, where country my parents came from the focus and topic of my life. This culture chose that, and that, I can see that as exhausting, or I can see it as an undue burden and a responsibility that I don't want and is too heavy, or I can see it as an opportunity. And for me, the reward for 17 years of doing work where countless young people say thank you for playing that character, thank you for speaking up in that room, thank you for just being somebody who stays in the game so that we have someone to say, she's doing it, maybe I can do it. Like, that's an opportunity. And that's, at the moment, and for a long time in my career, how I choose to see it.
Did you always consider yourself an activist?
I think no. I didn't always consider myself an activist, but it was always what I was doing. You know, I was 5 years old when I said I was going to be an actress, a human rights lawyer, and a veterinarian. And I'm failing at the veterinarian part, but you know, I had a strong sense of justice. And I contribute that to my American identity, being an American, thinking there is a difference between right and wrong. Those things actually exist. There are things as facts, and we can determine, you know, what is the right thing to do and what is the wrong thing to do. And as an American, I know that as a citizen of this country, I am vowing every day to choose right and to choose justice. And that's how I was raised. That's what I believed in, and it was such a big part of my American identity. So I feel like at heart, you know, I knew the difference between right and wrong, and I always had I always, you know, favored right, and it never went away. You know, my mother's a single mother who raised 6 children, basically on her own, and I would look at her, and she would still be finding a way to empower the women around her. She ran a housekeeping department at a Hilton hotel, and you know, we were struggling. There were times where there was no running water in our house, or the lights were off, or we didn't have a phone or a refrigerator, and yet she was always finding ways to empower the women who she worked with, the women who cleaned the rooms at the hotel, to help them figure out how to get their kid signed up for a scholarship, or how to get their kid into college, or how to find the right immigration lawyer. And so I saw her always find ways to empower the people around her, even though she was seeking that for herself in her own life. And so she was a really big role model for me in knowing that I did always have the opportunity to empower others, even while I was still struggling to empower myself.
There's this great Gloria Steinem quote: "We've begun to raise daughters more like sons, but few have the courage to raise our sons more like daughters." I heard that. You had a son last spring.
Yeah.
How will you raise him?
He's so cute, you guys. He's so perfect. I just want to eat him. I eat him all day, every day. You know, it was funny because I definitely thought I was gonna have a girl. Of course, I was gonna have a girl. And then they told me I was having a boy, and I thought, great, an opportunity, right? An opportunity to raise a good man. And my husband's a good man, and so we are in a good position to put a good one into the world. And I think we need that. And I've been thinking about this, and I thought about it a lot through my pregnancy, and I want for him the exact same thing I would want for my daughter. I don't want to live in a world where there's no space for men. I don't want to live in a world where men have to feel the way we have felt for so long. We're better than them. When we gain power, we can do it better, and we can do it right, and we can keep space for men and their voices to be important and valued. And you know, all I want for my son is the same thing I would want for my daughter: to know his innate true value, and to understand everyone else's innate true value, and to walk through the world with gratitude and respect and awe for his life and for everyone else's. And I'd want that for my daughter, and what I want is not just for my son, but for men to walk through the world with a sense of what the value of their life is and what the value of everyone else's life is.
And no mansplaining.
And well, I think that would come from it, right? No mansplaining.
We're gonna take a couple of questions from the audience. There are mic runners, so raise your hands if you have questions. And while we're doing that, could you tell us a little bit about your work with Time's Up?
Yes, we have some Time's Up people in the room: Tina Chen, and I think Katie McGrath is here, and Michelle Kidley, all incredible women. You know, I think the miracle of this time for me is that what has changed and what I have seen change in so many different spaces across so many different disciplines is how women are being, not necessarily what they're doing. You know, I watched as groups of women in our industry gathered in unprecedented type gatherings. Women across companies, across disciplines, showing up to kind of shed these invisible boundaries that we have adhered to and say, I'm going to be in this room as a woman with other women and just be together, which is something that is very hard to do in our industry, and I'm sure in every other industry. We're so isolated from one another. We're so often the only one in the room. We don't even get to sit in the same room and say, like, hey, good job. Hey, you inspire me. You're awesome. You know, and it seems like such a small thing, but I actually think that that's what this revolution is on every front. Like, the Me Too movement was women finding a community with one another and saying, oh wait, I can step up and know I'm not the only one. I can speak up and know that there's going to be other women speaking up, and I'm not going to be alone in this. And so, you know, there's so much that needs to change, but what really brings me hope is seeing within my own industry and across industries how women are standing with each other. And one of the first things that we did with Time's Up was we responded to a letter that the National Farm Worker Women's Alliance wrote to us. They wrote the women of Hollywood a letter to say, we see you. We see your pain. We know your pain, and we stand with you as your sisters. And the fact that farm workers could find the humanity to see themselves in us, to see our pain and to acknowledge it without what really our culture and news want to see, which is, well, how could their pain be the same pain as that pain? They're rich actresses. What do they have to complain about? But the farm worker women stood up and said, no, you're our sisters. You're our sisters, and we stand with you. And it was a call to action for us. It indicted us. It said, what are we going to do to stand with our sisters with all the privilege and access we have? And so one of the first things we did at Time's Up was respond to them with a letter, but also respond to them with the Time's Up Legal Defense Fund, which Tina Chen in the room founded and spearheaded and started. And, you know, Monica Ramirez, who's the president of that organization and who is extraordinary, she opened the door that allowed us to stand with one another and to not, as we say at Time's Up, to not be ranked, but to be linked. And there's so much power in the very simple permission of giving ourselves to relate to one another and to relate to what common experiences we have. And it is truly, truly, truly what, to me, what gives me hope and what feels so different about this moment is that not only are we watching women be so courageous and so brave and stand up day after day, but there's a sisterhood building and growing, and we're not going away. And that, to me, is the hope of the future.
Questions? This is my duty reminder that a question ends in a question mark.
Perfect. I'm going to totally follow your rules. So real quick, we're in a room, I think, of predominantly women. And so my question to you right now is just, what's your charge to us? I feel like we're in a kind of a cusp, and I feel like what you just said was a good springboard into what we're talking about. But we have, I'm assuming, a lot of power in this room. And to each other, what would be the one thing you would charge us all with leaving this summit to kind of move forward and empower each other?
Most likely, the women in this room are wonderfully empowered and accessed and resourced women, and that's not to say that we don't need empowerment, because obviously we do, but I would think about the women who are so far away from having access to this room. And I think one thing is we all do so much of this. We come together, we talk about our great work, and we talk about everything we want to get done. And sometimes we can mistake this for the work, and this isn't the work. The work is what happens when we leave here. The work is, I love, Time's Up has an initiative called Time's Up +1, which is wherever you go, bring a woman into that space who would not have been invited into that space. Like, I love that concept. So, I can't charge you with anything, but I can, say that for me, what I've charged myself with is trying to really expand my idea of what I think I'm capable of. This idea of exhaustion, of burnout. Like, I understand that conversation, and I feel that conversation, and I've had that conversation a million times. I'm burned out, I'm exhausted. How do I keep going? And it's interesting, having my son, I was afraid that I wouldn't care about anything else, that my son would come and I'd just be in love and never answer another email again. But right as I had him, a week after he was born, images of children being ripped from their parents at the border were emerging all around us. And not only was my fire still there, but it was stronger than it had ever been. And I have been realizing, as I come back from my maternity leave into the world, thinking, oh, how much do I want to take on, that actually my humanity and my compassion is pretty expansive. Like, I can actually care about a lot of things at the same time. And I can actually show up for a lot of things at the same time. And that's not to say we all need to do more, because that's a bigger conversation. But I think we all can sort of just shift our perspective about what we're capable of. And we're capable of showing up for what this time is calling us to do, which is to not get tired and to not get exhausted. And perhaps some of that is waking up and not just coming, not just fighting or doing your work from a place of anger and rage and urgency, which are all valid and totally understandable. But for me, I have found that the resource of love, doing things because I love people, makes it that I can show up more, because it's not about what I'm fighting against, it's what and who I'm fighting for. So.
Hi, I'm a reporter for the New York Times, and I was working on a story today about the response to the Kavanaugh accusations. And very interestingly, we had stringers, reporters fanned out all over the country, and the response, the credence to the accusers fell, as you might believe, on party lines distinctly. And how do we make sure that this moment, this Me Too moment, or whatever steps we're making for women, are not solely for one group or another, that are not partisan and not pitted? Because this seems to me an issue for all women, and yet when it comes across, it's falling on party lines, which is devastating to me. How do we make sure it's inclusive?
I think white women need to talk to white women. I think that you say party lines, but we also know who were the women who voted for Donald Trump. They were largely white women. And that's not to place blame or shame, that's to say that there are really, really difficult conversations that need to happen. And as a Latina, since I've been 17 years old, I've had to speak for Latino people across the world my whole life. And when you're a woman of color and you walk into a space, you are always responsible for your people. And you have to encourage your people and inspire your people. And if black people don't come to the polls, it's because black people didn't do enough to inspire them. And if Latinos didn't show up, it's because Latinos failed to inspire. But we don't charge the white community with speaking to their own and taking responsibility for what's happening in those communities and for what conversations aren't taking place. And I can certainly go and try to speak from my experience of a woman of color, as a woman of color, and try to bridge that gap and try to help a woman understand why we're more alike than we are different. But that is by far and away going to be an easier conversation for you to have, for instance. And I think that we have to have the conversation about why women are not seeing themselves in one another across that political divide. But we also can't ignore that there are huge racial implications in that divide as well.
Let's do one more. Is there a mic?
How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Before I ask my question, I want to say you are a fantastic, beautiful, smart young woman. And it's very nice to see you in person. I've seen you on television, but it's awesome to see you in person. I just talked to my daughter out there. I said, do you know who she is? She's like, yes, Mom. I'm like, okay, just checking. And I also have a young son. He's the baby. I have 3 kids, and he's 8, and he is my baby. Like, he's my little road dog. I don't even know where I was 8 years ago without him. It's a little scary. So congratulations.
Thank you.
So I will say this. So I won't tell you what company I'm from, but I am from a pretty big financial firm, which I'm sure everyone has heard of in the room, so I won't say the name. And I am brand new to the diversity and inclusion team. And I have an extreme passion for diversity and inclusion in my personal life. Like, I'm always that person saying, you know, like, we have to move forward. We have to be honest. We have to be inclusive. We have to do all of these things. And I've been for a long time one of only. One of only in college, one of only in grad school, one of very few in the company that I work at for a long time. So how they landed me on the diversity and inclusion team after being with this company for 20 years, I have no idea, but they got lucky. But what I will ask is, in this space, I have found it extremely challenging to move this business forward when it comes to diversity and inclusion. I have found goodness where people come up to me and say, Angela, I have a question for you. Is it Black or African American? I've heard it twice. I've been in the role for 3 months. I've heard it twice. I love it. And finally, people are asking the question, and I am extremely open with life. So I'm happy to answer it. I give them way more information than they need. I send them articles, all kind of stuff. But what I am finding a struggle with is, and I hope no one takes offense to this, but I'm brutally honest, is moving the needle on white males who are, let's say, over the age of 50. So I'm not quite 50 yet, but I'm not 40 either, so I'm kind of in between, who say they have a passion for the work that we're trying to do. But let's be honest, if they had a passion for the work that we're doing, they would have had this passion before this whole thing came about with the diversity and inclusion. Because I feel like it's only been a thing in most communities and most companies for a few years. And I've tried to meet every diversity and inclusion officer where I'm from, which is north of here, about 300 miles, that I could possibly meet. But what are some of the things, and I don't know if you've experienced this in your young life, but what are some of the things that you say that resonate with specifically men, white men, to help them understand that in order for us to be really effective, in order for us to be a culture who is open to everyone, and it's less about what you look like and more about what you produce and where you are and the ability to help other people, et cetera, how do you have those conversations? Because I feel like being on this team, and I'm new, the blame is always on me. And I'm like, I've only been on the team for 3 months. Like, I know we have this D&I thing that we need to fix, but I'm brand new, so I'm learning the role. And maybe that's an excuse. But I feel the blame game happening all the time instead of us all coming together trying to figure out what the problem is and how we solve it.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I mean, I don't know. But one thing I will share and say is that, you know, I'm an artist and I'm an optimist. So I have the affliction of assuming the best in people and keeping faith that we actually can have conversations with people who don't always see eye to eye, and believe that it's possible for people to hear something new in a new way and in a different way. I started an organization with my husband, who's in the room, Ryan, called Harness, and it was about bringing artists and culture makers in the room with activists, grassroots activists, so that our work as artists can be informed by the real life impact of the work that we do. And one of the most successful kinds of gatherings and most impactful kinds of gatherings that we've experimented with over the past couple of years has been conversations between showrunners, people who run shows, the top writers, head writers, creators, and grassroots activists. And we bring these activists who are at the heart of these communities and these issues and impacted themselves by these issues into the room to have conversations with showrunners about how the work they do every single day impacts real life people and impacts the daily lives of them, the communities they represent, their children. And we've had incredible actions come out of it. We've had showrunners go back to their writers' rooms and write into a show that 16 million Americans across party lines watch, you know, every week. They wrote in a turban Sikh man character into this show that 16 million people watch every week, which they would have never done, would have never thought to do had they not been exposed to why that mattered. And I guess I say this to say that what's so inspiring is that people can be reminded that what they do matters. People can be reminded that they have a role to play. And I think so many people and even artists tend to think of what they do as isolated from everything else. And so it's not about necessarily even teaching so much as inspiring someone to say, you yield this pen, and whether it's, you know, you yield this sword every day when you go down to write which images, which characters are about to go out into the world, you know, fill that in to the tech industry and the business industry, the investing industry. You go in and you yield this sword. How you yield it is up to you. But the fact that it's a sword and the fact that it will have real life impact and real life implications on real people's lives is a given. And reminding people of that can sometimes change their perspective and how they go back to their desk and do their job and yield that sword. And so I don't have all the answers, but I think the core of what I've seen work is having enough faith in people to have a conversation, and also reminding them what they are and who they are. They're not their jobs. They're not their careers. They're not a company. They're not a corporation. They're a human being, and they have a responsibility to other human beings. And I've seen it work, and I don't know if that's too altruistic and optimistic, but I gave my caveat in the beginning.
I'll give you my not believing in people answer real quick, which is that honestly, I don't try to appeal to people's goodness. I make an economic case for it. Like, there is data up the ass to show that companies are better off, institutions are better off, organizations are better off when there is gender and racial diversity.
But I just want to push back. Yes, applaud for that. But I just want to push back against that because, you know, we have admired that problem for so long. Like, we know that. We know that. We know that movies about women and characters with diverse casts, they work. And that business argument has been true and has been used for decades, and it still doesn't move the needle, right? So I appreciate that 100%, and there was a time where I felt like that's all it took. All we have to do is show them the stats. You just said it. I represent the largest growing demographic in this country. All I have to do is tell them people like me want to see themselves, and they're going to make it, and then they don't make it.
But what about when you show them the figures of the films?
It's an anomaly. That was the exception. Girls Trip worked as an exception. Hidden Figures was the exception. Bridesmaids was the exception. It never, I mean, Ugly Betty was this massive hit that was nominated for 11 Emmys. It was 5 years until we were off the air that another Latina actress was on broadcast television. So I appreciate that and respect that yes, sometimes you can appeal to people's business senses, but at the same time, we know that to be true, and we've known it to be true, and it isn't enough. So what do we have to appeal to get people to move on it? And if not their humanity, like, I don't know what the missing link is. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, because I've been that person who's like, oh, good, all I have to do is tell them how successful this is going to be, and they still choose not to do it. Mm-hmm. So it's deeper than that.
Mm-hmm. Let's do one more question, and then we've got to wrap. And hopefully you have a solution to this problem also.
If you could write the script of what Ugly Betty is doing today, who would she be, what would she be doing, and how much money would she be making?
I feel like Betty would be running for office somewhere. She'd be making so much money. And she'd be using it to empower other women. That's what she would do.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I'm supposed to tell you that there are drinks outside. We always like that type of news. And thank you all so much for coming. We have a full day of programming tomorrow. Now there's a bunch of things I'm supposed to tell you. Okay.
Oh, wow, that's so much.
Okay. You are all great. America is great. The actress. And